Dag, good morning, Sabona Dumela. Thank you so much for making the time this morning on the 10th of March to learn more about Business Central Security Management. I see there's still a lot of participants joining, but I'm going to kick off the session because there's quite a bit of points on the agenda that we would like to work through. I have shared my screen. Just with a few slides that I want to work through in our training session today. So please, just a note, it's not an interactive session, so the training will go on and continue to the next point, but we have allowed for a Q&A section, so please use the Q&A section and place all your questions there. Perfect. Let's kick off with the agenda that we will be covering in today's training session regarding the security management and Business Central. We'll kick off with access control strategies, where we will tell you more about user groups and user permission sets, following by creating and editing permission sets, specific concentrating on how to record permissions in Business Central, which will then followed by interpreting and resolving user permission errors, where we will take you through how to actually find a user error, what type of permission or permission set needs to be then added to the user groups. We'll be also then doing applying of security filters. So that is where you can have on a specific field level security, as well as we will close off our training today with a bonus session, just some small development done how to control access to financial information. Cool. Just from our side, some team introductions. So I'm Gerard Maynard, and I am working at Linc, as you should know, and doing project management and application consultant. And my moderator for today will be Jandre Robertson, which is also senior applicant consultant. And so Jandre will be helping me with the questions today. Perfect. Business Central Securities. So when we start and kick off with securities in Business Central, I want you to think of yourself in a ninja suit with a sword in your hand, and you're busy slicing and dicing some sculpture, maybe an eye sculpture or maybe a wood sculpture that you want to get to perfection. In Business Central, securities will always be a work in progress functionality. You will always try to get the best permission set or the best user group assigned for the specific user, for the role in a company that the user needs to play. So think of yourself as this person that's trying to get a nice, beautiful sculpture built, but there's still some rough edges on some sides, and it's not as beautiful as you want it to be. So in the session of today, I hope that I can help you to take those rough edges and make them a little bit more smoother, and also to understand how the securities fit in Business Central. Cool. Let's kick off with the first access control strategies. Just one thing I want to mention before we get into Business Central itself. You will see today we're going to go through stock standard user groups and user permission sets. And while we go through and we're going to assign user group and user permissions, please note and keep in mind that the different user group and permissions will be set up different per company requirement. So what I'm going to demo today is an Acronis database. And it might be different for the different requirement for different companies. Cool. I'm going to kick off and open the floor with user groups and user permission sets. So in Business Central, on the user card, which I will show you in Business Central soon, you have user groups And within user groups, you have user permission sets. And within your user permission sets, you have the underlying object types where you specify what type of permission you require and where to the permission needs to be set up to look at which underlying data sets. So I'm going to open up for Business Central, and then I'm going to take you through the user groups and user permission sets. Cool. We are in a Cronus database, and I am going to demonstrate user groups and permission sets. So first of all, we would need to go to the users page where we will find all the users where a Business Central license has been assigned to. Now, if a new user has been added to your Microsoft environment, you would need then to assign a Business Central license, which the next step following, you need to bring that user into the Business Central environment. And that you will do by going to the users page as shown and select the update users from Microsoft 365. That means that any new users that you added in your admin center will now be imported into Business Central so that that user can get access into the data sets. Cool. Once that's done, you will go to the specific user. I'm going to just use Marco as the example in our training session today. Perfect. So then I'll search, find Marco, open up Marco as our user today. And then I'm sure everyone is familiar with the user card. You can then see what permissions have been assigned to Marco as a user. And in the user group permission memberships, you'll find user groups that's listed. And if you look down below to the user permission sets, you'll find the specific user permission sets. Now, in Business Central, we want to maintain permissions by user group memberships. This is what we want to do so that when we create user groups for specific roles and functions in a company, it needs to be easy to maintain or add permissions for new users, or when a user changes a role in a company, to assign new permissions for that specific user. So that means that your maintenance of adding new permission sets to user group level instead of doing permission sets per user. If you start adding permission sets, manual permission sets in the user permission sets area, that means that that permission set is now owned by that specific user and it's not applied in a group no more. That means that you will have to maintain user specific permissions and you can't maintain it on the user group membership. So that's what I want to help you today to understand, that we want to maintain security by using user groups. So if I go back into the out-of-box user groups, just to show you what Microsoft ships as an out-of-box product, you'll see that there's quite a bit of user groups that you can choose from and for the different roles that a user might have in the business or in the company in the area. And you could also go into the specific user group and you can see what permission sets has been assigned for this user group. For example, I've entered the basic access. And if I go to permissions, you can see what permission sets has been added for this user group. When you use another example, if I go to D365 Finance, you can also see what permission sets has been assigned to the finance user group. And this finance user group will then be our level of maintenance. That is where we want, when we go back to the user card, to actually add permissions for that specific user. So if I go back to Marco, instead of remembering and keeping track of what user permission sets we need to add, I can go to the user group memberships fast tab and I can select Marco needs to be part of the D365 finance team, which help Marco then to have access to all the underlying permission sets that's been included in this user group. Cool. If I go back to user groups, and for example, all these user groups are out of the box, user groups from Microsoft, but sometimes a user needs a little bit more or less access that's included in these user groups. You can copy your permission or your user group out to a new user group and add your own permission sets to build your own user group. So I'm going to do an example of that. And remember that the out of the stock user groups can't be amended or changed. That comes from Microsoft. And so you would need, when you want to make changes to any of the existing user groups, you would need to copy that user group and then do the amendments or the changes. Or you can create a new user group where you then can add specific permissions to that user group. So I'm going to just, for example, training purposes today, you can create a new user group and you can call the user group any name that you would like. The suggestion would be to keep it company or database specific. So if you are working in a company user, then I would suggest start with the user and underscore so that you can easily identify the user-defined user groups in your database. So I'm going to create and use a new user group. I could also set a default profile. So the profile is what you see when you log into Business Central and how you will navigate in Business Central. So in the list, we've created now a new user group. And if I go to permissions, you will find that it's still blank. So it's just an open canvas where you can start now to add different permissions for this user group. And let's use an example that this specific user needs to be doing banking in Business Central, but not necessarily have a full finance functionality specific now to user Marco. Then you can build that new user group. You can select your permission sets. So I'm going to assign a basic permission set for basic access. I will then select more financial functionalities, maybe to do banking instead of the full financial package. And maybe we can have some cash flow permission sets as well. Adding in the cash flow permission set. So if we go one step back, we'll find that we've created a new user group. And within the user group, we can see what permission sets we have defined. So this means that we have not used out-of-the-box Microsoft user groups, but we've created our own user group, which we now can assign to specific member or members. So you don't have to necessarily go back to the user page and then add the user groups in for the user. You can also do that from the user group page. I'm going to say add users, and then I'm going to select Marco. And that means that I've now assigned this new user group for Marco. So just if you want to go back and have a look in your user card, and if we filter to Marco, we will then find that Marco has a new user group assigned, which we called user new. Perfect. Next is to go one step lower and do permission sets. So within user groups, you get permission sets. And the permission sets now consists of different permissions. Cool. I'm on the permission sets page, and this is out of the box standard permission sets created by Microsoft. And you'll see that it will all start with a D365 prefix in front of the permission sets. When we edit permission sets, we can't edit permission set where it's a system or a base application permission set. We would then need to follow one of two options. The first option would be then to create a new permission set and start to add your own permissions, or you would need to copy an existing permission set and make the necessary changes. Just a note on that, when Microsoft publish new functionality, it's specific now to cloud users, and you have created manual permission sets with custom fields or any other custom permissions, remember that Microsoft will not maintain the manually created permission set. That's not included in the update. So just take note of that, and that if Microsoft push an update, that the manually created permission sets will not be included in the update. Cool. So what I want us to do is I want to follow the two options just through to show you how this permission sets can be copied or created as new permission sets. And so as we've seen in the user groups, we can also select which permission set we want to copy. And when I select the account payable permission set, I can select copy permission set. And I can call it a new permission set. Just for training purposes, calling it new permission set. And you also have different copy operations where you can also copy by reference. So if there's any underlying permission sets in this permission set, you can copy it by reference. You can also have a flat permission copy, or you can just clone that specific user permission set. For our training purposes today, we're going to do a copy by reference. So what will happen now is we'll see that it will create a duplication of that specific permission set that we created. And if we go to the permissions of the new permission set, we would see that it includes permission sets account payable with then the D365 account payable full permission set. So we've copied that permission set and duplicated it. You can also now create your own permission set. And in this new own permission set, you can go to the permissions option, and you can start to list all of the permissions required in the permission set that you want to include in your user group for a specific user. Cool stuff. So just some user group and permission sets creations. And how we assign a user group to a user. Please note any questions if there are any questions around the user group and user permissions. Cool. If we look more into user group and permission sets on a more technical level and what is happening behind the scenes, and just to understand more how these user group and permission sets are built and set up in Business Central, you'll find that I want to demonstrate a house today. So I want to think of yourself as an architect in Business Central, but more kind of you're going to build a house, and you would need to plan how you need to build this house. And this house that we will build will represent a new user group that we want to assign to a user. So down at the bottom, we start off and we get the foundation of the house, and to have a solid structure so that our house is not falling over or having any cracks in it, or the roof might come off. And that foundation in Business Central, I want you to remember as the underlying permissions or object types. If I can explain more on the object types, the object type is, for instance, when you run a report and there's a specific object, or when you view a specific page, there's a page object, Or when you view table data, that's the underlying data in the table that you would need to see. And in Business Central, at the base, in the foundation of your house, you can select what do you want to include as solid elements in this specific user group, which would be your complete house. And for those different object types, you have options to either give read access or insert access, modify or delete access. So this is now down in the base where you want to say, do a user need to see the customer card? Or do the user need to see the customer card and insert new customer cards? Or do a user now only need to modify customer card? So it needs to read the customer card and only have modify access. Or do you want this specific user also to delete or user group to have access to delete any of the customer cards, just as an example. So this is down in the bottom in our foundation where all the solid elements needs to be added and maintained. If we then go to the next step in our house is we would need to build walls so that we can eventually put up a roof and we can move in our house. And I want to think of the walls as your permission sets. So earlier we've seen a couple of permission sets that's been shipped with Microsoft as out of the box. And we've also created a new permission set and we copied the permission set. So the permission set then contains underlying permissions to the different object types. So now we want to build specific walls in our house, which is our permission sets. And permission sets are a group of underlying permissions with different object types. For instance, when we want to create a purchase order, we would need to create a permission set to say, do we want access to the purchase order page? And do we want access to the underlying table data header and line fields? Or for sales orders, when a user needs to create sales orders, we would need to list all the permissions that we would require and allow a user to create sales orders. So those we call the walls in the house, which is our permission sets. Same if we go to the next house, also underlying elements of all the specific permissions. I'll demo that in Business Central as well, but I just want you to visualize, conceptualize, and see how the user group eventually where we want to get to consists permission sets and also consists of the necessary permissions. For example, the second house we have walls for posting of journals, or permission set where we can post a bank reconciliation. So you'll see that there's two houses, and we're going to build two houses where we list all the permission sets for each of the house in then a user group. So once we got our foundation, we got our walls for the house being structured and see which elements we would need to include. The next is then to create our user group, which then covers the permission sets and permission types. So that's how I want you to visualize user groups. So your top level is always your user group, which consists permission sets. And within your permission sets, you have the different permissions. That's where you specify to which table or to which page you want to allow a user to either read, modify, delete, or insert. So for example, in the first house that we've built, which we call in our user group, we have included two permission sets, which is to create a purchase order and to create a sales order. But underlying in the foundation of the user group, you would need to select which tables or which pages you would need access to execute the creation of a PO and execute the creation of a sales order, as well as when you want to post a journal or when you do want to do a bank recon, that you would need to include that in that specific user group. So as you can see, you can build all these different user groups, which we call then our houses. Just visualize it of a house. And one user can own more than one user group. So to go back to the user setup screen where we want to maintain permissions, we want to rather maintain it on the user group level and create all of the business roles as user groups. So that when a new user is on board, you would literally go and assign the user group for finance, a user group for that specific role in the business, instead of having to do a little bit more thinking work and get permission sets for that user pulled in and maybe kind of forget what the user actually needs to do. So yeah, I hope it helps for you to understand more about user groups and permission sets and what it consists of. And as I said, one user can own more than one house, so you can have more than one user group assigned. I am going to just going to show a quick demo in Business Central, just to explain that picture again. So if we go back to the top level and we go into users, and we use marker as in our example, you can see that this is where we want to maintain user permissions. So as easy as adding a new user group or more than one user group like we have in this example allows now for Marco to have access to certain functionality within Business Central so that he can do his day-to-day tasks. So if we go then down into the user permission sets, this is not where we want to maintain our permissions, but you can see what permission sets are included in these user groups. So we populate the user group for the customer, or for the user. It would then also populate the user permission sets that's included in the user group in the user permission sets faster. And then you can go into a specific permission set and you can see what permissions is included in that permission set. So that's the top level where we cover the house. So that's the roof of the house, which then holds everything together. That's the walls of the house. That's your user permission sets. And if you go into the specific permission set, you can see what is the permissions, what's the foundation. So when we have access to the new group user new, there's certain walls in the house, which is the permission set. And one of the walls consists then of good foundation elements. And this is where you can actually see the object types that I was speaking about earlier. So you can have different object types with different object IDs. For example, we have the GL account. So when you create a new GL account, you would need access to table data of 15 GL account, and you would need to have read permissions, and you would need to have insert permissions when you create a GL account. If you want to make changes to the GL account, you have to have read permissions to view the GL account, and you need to have modify permissions, and so forth. So this is the lowest level in your permission sets and user groups where the physical object type is included in that permission set. And as I scroll down, you can see that this specific permission set is set up to have only view access. So all the read-onlys will be then yes. If I look at a more permission set where you can do more than just to read, selecting the permission sets, I'm going to manage and I'm going to permissions. You would see that you also have in this permission set to the customer card, you can delete customer cards when you have the D365 account receivable permission set, or when you need access to the purchase line, you will have full access to the purchase line to insert new purchase lines in your purchase orders, modify it, or you can delete a line. So this is the lowest level. This is a technical level where you need to specify what permission you would need for what functionality in Business Central for which role. You can also access the same screen from your permission sets. So when you go into the permission set, you can select the permission set, you can select permissions, and then you can find the underlying objects that's included, whether this specific permission set allow a user to have access to mini forms, for example. Cool. I hope that makes some sense, and I hope that you understand how the structure works and how the user groups contains permission sets as well as underlying permissions. So when you've seen all those permission sets, the first thing must go through your mind is, gee whiz, how will we know which table we would need to add? Which object ID? Is it the table data? Do we need read insert? Do we need delete access? Sure, this is quite confusing. I'm sure there must be an easier way to do this. And yes, there are. The next topic that we have in our agenda is to create and editing permission sets by using the recording permissions functionality in Business Central. So there is easier ways and tools that Business Central make available for us so that we can record permissions easier than to go and actually figure out which table access. You can just imagine if you would need to start adding all those tables, it can take you ages. So I want to introduce the recording of permissions in Business Central, which we can create a new permission set. We'll create a new permission set in Business Central now, and then we will follow an example in Business Central. And the example that I want to use today is we have a creditors clerk, and the creditors clerk only needs to create purchase orders, not receive nor post or invoice, but only create purchase orders, for example. So just imagine we have Peter, and Peter is the new guy at the company, and Peter needs to only create purchase orders. Okay, so now we can go to Business Central and we can say, okay, Peter needs to create new purchase orders. If we go to the different user groups to see which user group will actually fit Peter the best, stock standard out of the box, we can go through all of these user group and we say, okay, there's a finance and purchase user group that might help Peter. But if we go and look at the permissions, what Peter will actually have access to when I assign that user group is, he's going to do journals, he's going to do fixed assets, he can do intercompany, so this specific user group will not work for him. With the underlying permission sets, there's a lot of other access that Peter won't need. So what we do next now, instead of stressing about which tables to add, we're going to use the recording tool and we're going to create a new permission set based on what Peter actually needs to do. So if I go into permission sets, I can create a new permission and I can create a custom new permission, calling it custom because that's not then system or base application based. It's custom, it's user defined. Custom, let's do that PO create. Only create purchase orders. So if I select the permission set and I go into permissions, I would see it's blank. So there's no permission types. Please note the following. When you have assigned object ID 0 for any of your object types, it means that the user has full access to all object IDs for that object type. It's very important to note. So if I leave this table data 0 in here, and I say read, insert, modify, and delete, yes, it means that if I assign this permission set to a user group that's included for Marco or for Peter, it means that you can access literally all data in the system. So please be careful that when you assign an object ID 0 for table data, the user has full read, write, modify, delete access in Business Central. Cool. So now you can try and figure out we need access to customer card, and you can populate a customer card, and you can do all, but phew, that's going to be hectic and taking a long time. So the tool that Microsoft then give us to help us out in doing permissions, we can record them by going to Actions, Record Permissions, and we can start. So the moment I hit the Start button, you get a prompt. Do you want to start recording now? We're going to say yes. And from now on, all the actions that you will do in Business Central will be recorded. So every underlying object type and what permission you required will be recorded in this new permission set. So I'm going to go to purchase orders with 1C. And remember, Peter's function is only to create purchase orders. So that's all that we will be doing. We will create a new purchase order. And I will be filling in a couple of fields from the header, just as example data. We'll be adding a vendor invoice number, which is a perfect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We will go to the lines and we can add an item that we need to purchase. Peter needs to get new desks for him at the office or for someone else that he needs to do. So I've selected. I can also select the location code. Remember that all actions that I execute in Business Central will be recorded in that permission set. So we have to be careful in what we need to do so that we don't include additional permissions. So what I've done is I've created a purchase order, fill in a couple of lines, I fill in the header. I might be needing to make 1 or 2 other changes on the purchase order itself, but for now I'm happy. This is what I want Peter to do. And instead of using overlapping permission set or user group that gives Peter more access than we actually wanted, we created and recording the permissions. So if we go back then to our permission set custom PO, we can go back to actions, record permissions, and we can stop. We're happy that we're done. Prompt is asked, do you want to? And we're going to say yes. And you'll find that the permissions will now be recorded in this new custom PO create permission set created. And it will list all the tables that you would require in this permission set for Peter to create his purchase order. So you can see I was in the purchase header and the lines, didn't delete anything, but I've created the new header and I've inserted data and modified existing data that was in the purchase order. You also need access to other underlying tables like the number series, what number series that it requires for you to assign to the specific document. And that's specific indirect. So that means that the user don't have direct permissions to the table, but you give indirect permissions, impersonate yourself for Business Central in a code unit that when it needs to assign that number series, it can get access to that specific table. I'm just scrolling through it quickly so you can see how many table data that you would require to manually add into your permission set if you had to do it manually. Yes, if you do once off small custom tables that you need a user access to, that's fine to add manually. But this recording tool helps us then to create specific permission sets for defined tasks in Business Central. I go one step back and we go to our custom POC permission set, and if we go to permissions, you would see that all the permissions listed in here. And what I can do now is I can assign this permission set to a user group where we want to maintain. So if I use then user group, let's say new, which we have created, I can go to permissions, and now I can add my new permission set created based on the recording function. Cool. I hope that helped a bit, and it creates a bit of excitement to have specific permission sets created. Just a note out there again, user-defined permission sets. When Microsoft do an update and you have interesting permission sets created in there, it's not updated and maintained by Microsoft. So you might need to, from time to time, maintain those permission sets and add additional tables that's required. Cool. Next steps that we have on the agenda is interpreting and resolving user permission errors. So this is typical where a user will send an email to the internal help desk or report it to yourselves as super users, where there might be access or permission error that pops up. For example, in the first one is you don't have the current permissions, and then it gives you the exact table data. So it shows you which object you need access to. It tells you what is the object name, and it also tells you what type of access do I need to that specific table data workflow webhook subscription. So I'm going to do another example. Sorry, the current permissions prevented the action, and then you'll see again table data, object type, and then it gives you the average cost adjustment entry point, and it gives you a read, what do you need access to. And so I added another one for you, just some different ones that you can see. And that is when we try to add a dual account in lines, it say, sorry, the current permission prevented the action. You would need to a specific table data link setup read access. So to the link setup, you would need read access. So just a few examples that you might receive when you need to action as a super user, or where in Business Central to go and look and find what permission set, what underlying permissions I would need to assign to this user, or maybe to the user group, so that the user can action. So I'm going to go into Business Central again. Perfect stuff. In this demo, I want to show you how to create a document in Excel where you can easily find and look up your table data permission. But before we get there, just to bring back the screenshot, is we would need the ID of that specific table data to add that ID to a specific permission set, or to find where that permission set might include already access to this underlying table data. So in the error screenshot, it will give you the name of the object or the table data, but it don't give you the ID. And we would need to have the ID so that we can apply a lookup and see where's the specific ID included in an existing permission set. Cool. So in Business Central, if you go then to Business Central and you type in table information, you would find that in table information, you can see all the tables listed in Business Central. And in this specific view, page view, you can find the table number based on the table name. So if we go back to the screenshots that I've attached for us here, if we want to find the workflow webhook subscription table ID, which we would need to filter, we can then search for workflow webhook subscription in Business Central. So in the table information, I can now start and I can search for workflow webhook subscription. So you can just type it in there. And then we can see that the table number for that specific first permission error that we got is in table 469. Okay, so that's good information to have. The next step now is to find where this read permission of workflow webhook subscription is included in an existing permission set, so that you can assign that specific permission set to this user. And I want to demonstrate that quickly, how to generate for you a refreshable Excel sheet, which you can always use to look up and see in which permission set you can find that ID. So if you go into your permission sets, I'm going to go step by step, permission sets. You can access literally any of these permissions because we would just need to go to the underlying permission table. So I'm going to select permissions. Then in the permission set, we want to show all permissions. So I'm going to select to view all permissions, which would include all underlying permission sets for the specific permission set. When I'm in the expanded permissions page, this is now where I can literally see what is included in specific permission sets. But I don't have the option here to just add a column in by standard and say what permission set is this table data included. And that's why we're going to create ourselves edit in Excel worksheet, which you can always refresh. So I'm going to go to System Filters and remove any filters that's applied by Business Central themselves. Because remember, we just selected the first permission set, and it still filter only object data and underlying objects for that permission set. So then I'm going to remove my filters. And just a note that this is a once-off exercise. Once you've created, you can always use this Excel sheet. And once I've now removed those filters, it means that I have a complete list of object types and object IDs in Business Central in my tenant in my database, which I now can filter on to find in which permission set. Underlying permission set, I could find specific object IDs. So the next step is then to create your edit in Excel sheet. You can also do open in Excel, but edit in Excel will take for your refreshable sheet that you can use. Once you have downloaded the permission edit in Excel, it will look like this in your Excel sheet. So after it's been opened and it has been refreshed, then you will find that in this Excel sheet, there's the object ID that we required. So first of all, we got a screenshot with a name. Then we go into table information and we find the ID. And then we go back to our expanded permission sheets that we created as a once-off. And now we can literally filter on that ID to see in which permission set that required permission is included. So if I then go back to my table information, I can see the workflow webbook subscription is table 469. So if I go to table 469 and filter, I would see that if the user needs access and read access to that specific table, this is the existing permission sets that you can add to that user group to include the specific table access. And just be careful that you don't just choose the first one that comes up and appear in your list, but also make sure that you only need to read access as per the screenshot. You only needed to read access. So you would only need to filter and find for read access. So there's D365 read is your permission set, or there's another option, Intelligent Cloud, that you can select. So you've got two permission sets that you can assign for that user. And to execute that now in Business Central, so we found all the info we need, is we go back to that specific user. Let's use Marco again. And for Marco, we can see that he has access to these user groups. So now the best, as we said, suggested is go to and maintain your user groups. So if we go to user new, for example, we can add then the permission set. Go to user new, select from list. And then we can just edit that role. We go to new. And if we go to permissions, we can just add that permission, and it was the 365 read. D365 read. So that's a D365 read. So that means we've added the permission set to the user group. Keep in mind that there might be other members also included in this user group, and that you do want to allow other users to have access in the same user group where you apply the permission set, also have access to that specific table. But that's in a quick nutshell, just to show you how to find the table ID that you would need to filter to find which permission set includes the specific table, what access you required, and then actually apply it to the user. Cool. If there's any questions around that, please feel free to raise that in the Q&A. Let's go to our next agenda item, and that would be applying security filters. So security filters limit the user access based on a filter. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration on that. In our example, we'll go to general journal line. I'll create just a simple permission set. I'll add the general journal line in the permission set, and then we're going to apply a field filter to that. And the reason for applying the field filter to that is to allow the specific user to only have access to payment journals and not to all type of journals. When we apply the field filters, we don't want it to be like in the picture at the bottom on the right hand, where we only want to have like a knickknacks to hold the latch for the door to have access, or to have the most common username or password. We want to make sure that when we add this field filter into the permission set, that it's done correctly. Cool. So I'm going to go to Business Central. I'm just going to create a new permission set. I'm going to say security, just for security filters, and just to name them for the training. So in the security permission sets, I'm going to add then for us, I know the table IDs by now, but you can also look and select it from the list. So what we want to do is we want to have to the general journal access added into the general journal. So you can either search and for the object that you want to add in, or if you know the number, you can just type the number. So for example, we're going to go to general journal line in this example. So you'll see that at this moment, I've added general journal line access for this permission set. You can have read, insert, modify, or delete permission. You can just literally, if the user must not be able to delete, you can just remove the delete from the selection, or you can have it indirectly accessed. But more than we want to apply a security filter for this specific permission set for the user. And if I select the security set, you can on that field within the general journal line table, you can now select to which field you want to limit, add a security filter limit. And in this example, I'm going to use general journal template name, and I'm going to add a filter called payment. So this means that the user will only be able to process or open up the payment journal, not access to cash receipts, not access to general journals, but you filter this permission set to only allow a user to view payments or access the payment journal. So you can see the security filter is filled into payment. And now you can assign this new security permission set to the user group that's applicable to the specific user group that only needs to see payment journals. So that's typically when you have a creditor's clerk, you don't want them to go to cash receipts or to post general journals. You can add then a security filter on that specific field. Just to note that you can't do that on existing out-of-the-box permission sets. You would need to create your own manual permission set where you can then apply the security filters. Cool stuff. So then if we go back to the slides, there's one more agenda point that we have left to go over. And that's a bonus point where we can show you what can be done on permissions within Business Central. And that's thinking of a toggle switch where you switch permissions on or off, not necessarily need to go through user groups and permission sets or add any recordings. You literally have on and off switch. I'm going to just demonstrate that quickly in Business Central. Cool. So the scenario I want to do for you today on the specific user switch on and off is chart of accounts. And we want to limit visibility for specific users not to be able to view the amounts within the chart of accounts or to view the balance field in chart of accounts. For example, if I go into chart of accounts, I can go into different GL accounts, for example, resale items. I can see that there's a balance. I could also go in here and see what was the total salaries posted. And I can see maybe what is salaries paid, which accounts, etc. Or I could have access to other financial information in Business Central. And we want to prevent that. So when you drill down into that specific balance, you can see exactly all the transactions with the amounts. And we say no. For specific users that only needs to create purchase orders or needs to do basic functionality in Business Central, we've added functionality to the user setup table. So if we go to user setup, this is where we maintain our posting dates in Business Central or add filters for responsibility centers. We've created this div, which is called limit GL visibility. So when I switch on the limit GL visibility, that toggle switch to put it on and off will now limit the user not to see any financials. So if I go one back and I refresh my connection to apply the security filter, you would find that I can't see where is the balance field. The balance field's gone. It's not visible. I can try in many ways. I can go to personalize. I can try and add a field in here, but there's no way I can't see that specific balance field. And trying to go into any of these, we know there should be GL entries posted on resale items. You can go to 2110, trying to find a way to go to the ledger entries. But you can also see that there's no amounts here. There's transaction posted, but you can see no amount. So you can also not trying to export this to Excel and sum them together to get total. So it completely blocks you off to see any of that amount listed. So yeah, that's just some bonus functionality that we do have available that you can have in your user setup. And we call it limited or limit GL visibility. Once I deselect and I put the toggle switch on, and because I'm the same user, I just refresh my connection for the security filters to apply. I should be able then to see my balances again. As you can see, I can see and view my balance. Start of the training. Good. So this brings us to the end of our Business Central Security Management training session for today. I hope that all of you could at least learn one thing today, or at least think of security and permissions as a house that you built and you have a full town of houses that you can maintain, instead of trying to build a new wall here and maintain a wall for another house there and then it fell over. Think of the work in progress as having your sculpture there that you're still busy slicing and dicing, and in the end of the day, try to make it as smooth as possible. But it's always there will always be changes, new users that will be added, etc. So I really hope that you've enjoyed the session today and that you've learned. Before we step into the Q&A time, so we have about 25 minutes where we can list a few Q&A answers, questions and feedback. The next session will be on reporting. So that will be on different reporting, just FYI. So the next session in 2 weeks' time will be all in reporting. Cool. Germany published the question for us and to say, where do I limit which company and user can access? A very good question, Germany. So I'll go into Business Central and then I can show you quickly. That's all dependent on the user card. So if we go back to the user card, and I can select Marco as an example today. In the user group membership pass tab, where we want to maintain our user groups, you'll find that there's a company name on the right. So if you want to limit a specific user to a company, you would then complete the company name to limit this user to only have access to the permissions company, which we created for the training session today. And Jean-Marie, I can also show you there's another user settings that you can also complete on that. So this is where you limit the access. But when you limit the access for the user, you must also make sure that in the user settings that you set the default company to the only allowed company. Otherwise, it might, I'm just going to do an example to this company. Otherwise, if it's still saying Cronus maybe, and you've limited the user to another company, the user won't be able to access Business Central because you specifically set up this user to look at a company which the user don't have access to. And so just look out for that. Luann, thank you for your question. Luann asked if there would be a workshop or a training session on workflows. Luann, yes, we will definitely note that down as a next topic or discussion or training session. Be informed and updated. John-Marie, yes, you can absolutely do that. I'll show you that again on the users. You can, John-Marie, just ask a question. Can you give a user access to 2 companies? Yes, you can. If I go back to user Marco, as an example, I'm just going to delete a couple of these user groups to make it easy. Delete all the lines. You'll see if I delete that just for everybody's purpose, the user permissions will also be deleted. So let's give Marco access to these 365 Finance. The user group where we want to maintain access in the permissions company based on the user group. So you can action those functionality, and you can give them the same access to a different company with the same access permissions. So yes, you can. So you would need then to just specify what the access will be per company. You can also define different access for a company. So if the user needs to do A, B, and C in company 1, D and F in company 2, you can also assign different user groups to the different companies. Johan, thank you for your question. You asked, does Linc deploy the limit GL view on the user setup? If you currently cannot see the functionality, yes, Johan, that's correct. And that's a Linc app that needs to be deployed to your environment so that you can have that functionality. Yes. Yeah, specifically on for cloud-based users as well. John-Marie, thank you for another question. John-Marie is asking, is there a way I can see on the user card if a permission set has been added without being part of a user group? John-Marie, so yes, you can. But yeah, the way to do that is when you remove your user group permissions in your user group membership fast tab, you'll find that there will be user permission sets left in the user permission set fast tab, which does not include or not included into any of the work groups assigned. So you can remove those work groups for the user, and whatever stays behind in your user permission set means that it's manually being added to the user permission set fast tab. The other way to do it is then to compare the user permission sets. Maybe use an Excel sheet and export this to Excel. And then you can also go to the user groups and export the permission sets and do a manually comparison. In Business Central, the easiest way is just remove as temporarily the user group, and what's left in the user permissions would be then manually added. If you have any questions on Business Central Securities that you might not be able to think right now, or maybe later in the afternoon, please feel free to send an email, reply back on the invitation, or send an email to myself, gerard@linc.co.za, and we'll be in contact to help answer those questions. And after the session, we will also send you the feedback of the session as well as the recording, so that you can always at a later stage go through the recording again. Maybe just a note, when you give feedback, please help us to list more topics so that we know what we can cover in our second week or the next week sessions, please. Perfect. That is it then for the Business Central Security training session for today. Thank you once again for your time in everyone's busy schedule to participate in the session. We'll send out the session to everyone and ask a bit of feedback, and also help us then to list new topics so that we can continue going and helping the community to train more in Business Central. Thank you once again, and enjoy your weekend.